Hey guys, just wanted to take a moment to thank you for listening to SiDEBAR Forever. If you like the show, please subscribe to us at sidebarforever.com, as well as share episodes of the podcast on your social media. That way, new listeners can find us as well. The brilliant documentary, I Am Not Your Negro, is available right now on Netflix and Hulu, and you should watch it. Narrated by actor Samuel L. Jackson, the film is based on an unfinished manuscript by celebrated author James Baldwin. Baldwin's intent with the manuscript was to show the overlap in the lives of civil rights leaders Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., all of whom were friends of his. This podcast has never reviewed a proper documentary before, and with it being Black History Month here in the States, we jumped at the chance to change that. In the conversation, we discussed the use of archival footage from the civil rights movement, what makes for an effective documentary, feeling like an other in your own country, and the insights offered by I Am Not Your Negro into the life and life's work of the late James Baldwin.
If any white man in the world says, "Give me liberty or give me death," the entire white world applauds. When a black man says exactly the same thing, he is judged a criminal and treated like one, and everything possible is done to make an example of this bad nigger so there won't be any more like him.
The story of the Negro in America is the story of America. It is not a pretty story.
Most of the white Americans I've ever encountered, sure, they have nothing whatever against Negroes. That's really not the question. Really a kind of apathy and ignorance. You don't know what's happening on the other side of the wall because you don't want to know.
In America, I was free only in battle, never free to rest.
We need to take action, any kind of action, by any means necessary.
They needed us to pick the cotton, and now they don't need us anymore. Now they don't need us, they're going to kill us all off. There are days when you wonder what your role is in this country and what your future is in it. I can't be a pessimist because I'm alive. The question you've got to ask yourself, the white population of this country's got to ask itself, is why it was necessary to have a nigger in the first place. Because I'm not a nigger, I'm a man. But if you think I'm a nigger, it means you need it. And you gotta find out why. And the future of the country depends on that.
So we've never discussed a proper documentary on the podcast before. And with I Am Not Your Negro available right now on Netflix and Hulu, we thought, February, Black History Month, would be a great opportunity for us to change that. Mm-hmm. And for anyone who is not aware and hasn't seen it, I Am Not Your Negro is a 2016 documentary. It was directed by a filmmaker named Raoul Peck. It's based on James Baldwin's unfinished manuscript, which at the time was called Remember This House. The film is, just deftly and warmly narrated by Samuel L. Jackson. And it explores the history of racism in the United States, really from the civil rights era all the way up to Black Lives Matter. It's told via Baldwin's relationship with civil rights leaders Medgar Evers and Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., who were friends of his. And oddly enough, and coincidentally enough, I guess I should say, all of whom were assassinated within about 5 years of each other. Mm-hmm. The movie was nominated for Best Documentary Feature at the 89th Academy Awards. I don't think it won, but it did win a BAFTA Award for Best Documentary, and it's 93 minutes long, and it has a near perfect score of 99% on Rotten Tomatoes, and you should definitely watch it if you haven't seen it. So we're gonna discuss the movie here today and talk a little bit about some of the themes and some of the the work of Baldwin. But I want to start with Adrian. Adrian, you are a big history buff. What'd you think of the movie, man?
It was very, very evocative, and I thought it covered a lot of ground in terms of, especially from the vantage point of someone who is kind of unfamiliar with the period. Like, it's a good capsule. And I don't mean that in the sense of, oh, well, it's entertaining or anything like that. I mean, it's a good educational capsule of, and that's just the start. That's just the start. Let me get that out of the way, too. This is just the start of, you know, even beginning to scratch the surface of a description of the civil rights movement. But they did a great job of encapsulating that, you know. And the other thing that I was struck by, too, is that I had seen a lot of this footage, you know, but I had never seen some of it from a different vantage point, and some of it was in color, which anytime you see any of these past events in color, not colorized per se, but in like genuine film color, you know, of the period, it really puts it in a whole other realm. But that's not to discount the black and white stills as well, you know, because man, some of those stills are so virulent. Like, you're just like to see, you know, these young black kids wanting to just go to school. That's it. And you look, and just the background of, like, you know, all of these white people just feral, you know, just gnashing their teeth, just seething with hate, you know? It's just, it really puts it into base relief, you know, what was going on and how much of a struggle it was then. I mean, we are still grappling with issues now in this nation, but back then, many of us probably could not even imagine, you know, living under those conditions as African Americans, as black people. You know, I think it would be almost unimaginable to modern, you know, blacks if they were transported back then, you know. And just Baldwin's words just really oh man, it just set it off. You know what I'm saying? Like, just so insightful.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And just it was very well done.
Adrian, what Adrian is touching on is probably the point in the film where Baldwin had been living in Paris for about a decade.
Yeah.
And he was you know, and he would read in the newspapers what was going on with the civil rights movement and what was happening back in America. And he said he saw a photo of, if I'm not mistaken, it was a photo of Dorothy Counts when she desegregated that high school in Charlotte.
Yeah.
And that was the match that lit the flame, where he said, you know, I've got to get back. Everyone else is doing their part. I've got to get back and do my part. And I've got to be a part of this as well. And I can't just sit over here in France, you know, and be a part of the, you know, expat, you know, black intelligentsia, you know. Yeah, that whole thing. So, yeah, I agree with you. And, you know, seeing those photos, it's really, really jarring and really, like, it's just inhumane.
Yeah.
You know, that you're treating teenagers this way. You're treating women this way. You're treating elderly people this way. Hell, grown men and women, you know, that they're being, you know, treated, I mean, horribly. But anyway, what did you think, D?
Man, every bit of what you guys just said is accurate and profound. For me, I found it very hard to finish it watching it, man, because I watch things generally for entertainment purposes, and even historically, I can find something in things that aren't about me interesting and engaging and entertaining. This very little of this was celebratory for me. Even though I celebrate the works of James Baldwin. I elucidate in the words of Martin Luther King. And quite frankly, if it hadn't been for Martin Luther King Jr. Being the peaceful civil rights leader that he was, I don't think those kids would have stood a chance in terms of them going through the school and being spat upon and like in some cases like they even put their hands on them, man.
Yeah.
They put their hands on them. I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. You put your hands on me, it's over, dude. Like there's a couple of times we've seen the whole thing where in the civil rights movement where they were protesting on the outside of various buildings and things of that nature, and they had police officers like hosing them down with water hoses, and one of the dudes, man, one of the police officers sold one dude with a club, and dude went toe to toe with him, was knocking him out.
They showed that one in every civil rights documentary, and I love it every time.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. Because one of the characters I watched was from some movie, I forgot what it was. It's the only thing that separates me from you is that you have a badge. Take the badge off, I kick your ass. I think it might have been Eddie Murphy's
48 hours?
That's what it was. It was Eddie Murphy's
48 hours.
40 hours, yeah, with Nick Nolte, So it's like one of those things wherein, I'm hardly militant, but at the same time, you realize after being oppressed for so long, you kind of have to either say, okay, you go into survival mode, and I'm gonna let you take advantage of me and beat me down and treat me like a less than a human being, or I'm gonna stand up, rise up, and do something about it. So I fully understand, the anger and the frustration of the time period based on how people were being treated, and I swing back and forth between both Malcolm and Martin in that regards. So I was glad James came back home after being an expat to add his awesome articulation to the situation, and the movie's great, man. It's great.
I felt the same way, man. It was really moving, and I was drawn in immediately, largely by Sam's narration. Mm-hmm. I mentioned this to you guys on another podcast episode, but the first 15 minutes, I didn't even realize it was him. Mm-hmm. His voice was very quiet and small. His tone was almost elegiac throughout the entire thing.
His diction was pure, like the way that he was enunciating and putting oomph. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just all of that. And then, like Adrian said, a lot of the footage I've seen, many times before. But I liked the fact that, from Baldwin's, his original unfinished manuscript, he was making references, because I think his goal with this was he was friends with Medgar Evers and Malcolm and with Martin, but I think his goal was to show, because they're all seeing, like Dee said, one part Malcolm, one part Martin, and then Medgar over here, and they're all seen as kind of like separate entities. Even now, like with the Judas and the Black Messiah, the film out about Fred Hampton, they're all seen as separate, but he wanted to show how their lives overlapped and how they would bang into one another, culturally speaking, and in terms of what the different sides of the movement, how they would intersect. And so, him being kind of like a through line in terms of his relationship with all of them, I think that's what he was trying to explore. So being able to see some of that, and then him talking about like watching John Wayne and watching, Westerns as a child.
Yeah, man.
And, the idea that, not only do you see yourself absent from these great fictional, works, these movies and serials and novels, but then you see, white actors portraying Native Americans and Asians.
And black people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Al Jolson and people like that putting on blackface. And so, what kind of an effect that has on a percentage of the population to not see themselves represented ever, at all, as if they don't matter. I really, really dug it. I dug the music and the score. I think it's a Russian composer who actually did the music for it. And I was immediately drawn in, and I sat through it. It was one of those Saturday or Sunday, where I put it on and I was folding clothes, and I stopped folding clothes. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was just like, I can't let any of my attention get away. I've got to watch this in total. And that's why I mentioned it to you guys.
Right.
So.
I had a thought as I was watching it. The part where they mentioned about John Wayne and how a lot of those movies and media back then were kind of emphasizing the other. Like, this is the history as we tell it of how this country was formed. And we're just going to excise, the nasty bits that went into it. And, speaking of John Wayne, there was an example that I thought about even as I was watching it. John Wayne had this movie out back in 57 or 58 no, 59, called The Horse Soldiers, about the Civil War, right? He played like a Union. He was the leader of a Union band that went on a raid into the South. You know what I'm saying? And the key thing about that is that they starred as a slave, Althea Gibson, who was just fresh off of her win.
Wow.
At Wimbledon. She had won Wimbledon. First black female wins Wimbledon. And what did she get when she come back here? You know, a role playing a slave in a John Wayne movie. Damn.
Right.
I was just like, that's jacked up, yo, but that was indicative of the period, unfortunately. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of John Wayne, far be it from me to pass up an opportunity to disparage him.
Okay.
His infamous 1971 interview with Playboy,
mm-hmm.
you know, where he talked about, and I'm reading a quote here, "I believe in white supremacy," he said. He said, "We can't all of a sudden get down on our knees and turn everything over to the leadership of the blacks. I don't believe in giving authority and positions of leadership and judgment to irresponsible people." So,
wow.
In the immortal words of Public Enemy, motherfuck him and John Wayne.
Right. Yeah, that's it.
That's so messed up. I've never heard that. I never knew that. Dang. Like I had heard it over the years, you know, that, you know, he had those type of tendencies. But man, that's fucked up. Now I got to turn around and, cause I have several John Wayne movies. Like, fuck.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, man. Let me tell you, man. When Public Enemy came after you back in the day, they weren't cherry picking. They were coming after you for a reason. And we're talking about some very educated and smart moves that were made by Chuck D and the people around him to help him get to the point that he was. Now, arguably, of course, there's some things there which were slanderous and problematic and all that stuff. You can't have the good without the bad, but there were some points of eloquent, like well-spoken, like pure that were coming from their mouths, dude. And that was just an example of one of the many little chunkets that they had. But yeah, man, in terms of the history is defined by the victors. You know, you look at the things that would be told for years, man, like cowboys and Indians, how the Indians were always the bad guys, and how, you know, when
the Indians were savages,
right?
That's always the thing. Somebody who's not like us that we don't understand, they're savages,
right?
But no, I totally agree, and you know, and that's the thing. That's the dichotomy there. You know, getting back to the film itself, you know, you see how history is portrayed as far as, like, you know, these great, you know, American tragedies when it happens to, you know, the white people, you know, in the history. But when it comes to, like, the black people and the minorities that have been here since the country's inception, it's like, well, we'll just brush that under the rug, you know what I'm saying? And if they deign to bring it up, we'll just, you know, tamp it down, you know what I'm saying? And it's just, it just came to a point where you couldn't tamp that down any longer. Like, you know, we as a people just weren't going for it, you know? And it's a struggle even now, in my opinion, to keep that same energy alive, because there is so much out there now to kind of, you know, make us not have that same drive, that same initiative, you know, and it's very important. It's very important to keep that going. Seriously.
Yeah. A little bit of background. The manuscript, again, was based on a book. I think Baldwin had been commissioned for it. He had gotten the money and everything. It's called Remember This House. And as a matter of fact, I believe his estate was sued by the publisher because James Baldwin died, I think, in 1987, and he never finished it. So they wanted the money back, you know. But anyway, it was based on a book called Remember This House, and it was only 30 pages that Peck, the director, had access to. But he also got access to tons of other of Baldwin's unfinished manuscripts, notes, letters, interviews, telegrams, postcards, and pictures, and unfinished screenplays via the Schomburg Center in New York City.
Ah.
So he got a lot of things, and recordings as well. He got access to quite a few things. But Baldwin's as an author, he's written fiction. He's written he's got collections of essays. He's written poetry. He's a playwright. Probably most famously, Go Tell It on the Mountain, Notes from a Native Son, which is really the only book by him that I read as a younger guy. If Beale Street Could Talk, which was of course made into a feature film here recently. And the big one is The Fire Next Time. Mm-hmm. That's one of his most noted books. But the three of us are pretty much documentary heads, and I wanted to ask you guys what you all thought, because I was trying to think about it myself. Like, what is it about what makes for a good documentary? You know, which ones are the ones that stay with me, and which ones are the ones that don't? And I know, it's easy to say subject matter, which I think is important, but I've watched documentaries about subject matters that didn't have anything to do with me, and I got drawn in. I watched I watched a documentary about like a bunch of drug addicts, and it was fascinating. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, I was immediately like, I was glued to my seat. But I wonder, as it relates to this particular film, because I'm, like Dwight said, watching this same footage, first of all, I try not to watch too much of this stuff because I don't want to be desensitized to it. I don't want to see the same footage of fire hoses and dogs and people being hit with batons so many times, the same footage, that all of a sudden it doesn't affect me. Mm-hmm. And then just, the subject matter that Baldwin was tackling, and that, ultimately Raoul Peck and the other filmmakers, his collaborators, were tackling. It's difficult, but obviously the subject matter, I tend to really like documentaries in general because the pace is very measured in terms of the storytelling. Mm-hmm. There aren't these, peaks and valleys that you get in narrative fiction, and, these, third acts, if you will, that kind of ties up everything neatly in a bow, and, or this climactic, it's not any of that. Usually at the end of a documentary, you kind of just left to ponder what you've seen. But what do you guys think are some characteristics of a great documentary, and especially as it relates to I Am Not Your Negro?
For me, it's got to have a solid narrative voice. One of the things I always liked, and I like the fact that we couldn't tell it was Samuel L. Jackson, because what he's known for mostly is fictional characters and doing things which are somewhat flamboyant and boisterous. Another thing I find important is not necessarily the subject matter, but like you said, because I've seen things that, like, okay, I didn't have any idea I wanted to watch that. When I watched it, I was like, wow, that was cool. But there has to be something that's a human part to it. Like, it's not watching, oil being drilled from, the shell of the earth. It's Richard Attenborough watching geese migrating, or mm-hmm. Things of that nature, which you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was I wholly agree with you guys as well, in that, most importantly, perhaps paramount, is there has to be some type of narrative drive, because as the term dictates, you are documenting an event or events, your lives, you know what I'm saying? And so what I look for in a documentary, like I'm a big historical and military documentary, head. That's where my mind is most of the time. That's what I look for, mm-hmm. And I find stuff that handles, that subject matter best is that, foremost, you have to have all your facts in check, because, there's some of us out here, perhaps like you guys, where we'll read up on stuff too. It'll make us go read more on a certain, time period, or on a certain person, and you start collating all of these facts and a bit more background that make the documentary richer, or make what you've already viewed richer, And so it's very important that you do mm-hmm. have mm-hmm. facts there, that you're not just looking to just do a narrative just to emit or to evince some type of, drama, or some type of, dramatic, push, so there's that. And then two,
right,
And speaking about, the voices, especially with the rise of Ken Burns, and his series of documentaries, the thing that makes those so effective. I mean, hey, every time I edit our podcast for iMovie, there's an effect in iMovie called Ken Burns. I use it all the time.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Hey, use that, yo. Use that shit.
and it's just the way that that he takes, these historical stills, these pictures and these images, and even though they're stills, he's able to move the camera across it or manipulate them. Well, that's probably not a good term to say. He's able to use that source material in such a way that it makes it come alive. It doesn't just feel like just a still.
Yeah.
And then you have, on top of that, the voices giving, life to these stills as well. Like you were talking about Samuel L. Jackson earlier. He was in, I think he voiced Frederick Douglass in the Civil War. Ken Burns' documentary from 1990.
Okay.
And that stuff just comes alive. Morgan Freeman is in it. Sam Robards. Just, those voices just make the work come alive. Rather than, because we'll never hear them. We'll never hear what Abraham Lincoln sounded like. We'll never hear what, Frederick Douglass sounded like, or Nat Turner's own words. So documentaries like this, we hear, Malcolm in his own words, his own voice. Same thing with Martin.
Yeah.
Same thing. Before this, obviously I knew of Medgar Evers, but I really hadn't seen many interviews with him. All I had known was just that he was in Mississippi, fighting the struggle down there, and that he was fatally shot down. That's all I knew of Medgar Evers, So I had never seen, before this documentary, at length, him speaking in his own words, So that's the other thing too. Like how do you take these past events where in some cases there may not have been any source material in terms of, visuals, like film or sound, so that you can hear that person, but how do you make that come alive and still retain the historical accuracy, to get the point across? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Before I comment, I was gonna make a joke. I wonder if when Sam was narrating as Frederick Douglass, I wonder if he had his Mr. Glass wig on.
There you go.
Trying to get in character.
There you go. The Afro Gibraltar, yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny what you guys are pointing to, and specifically what you're talking about, Adrian. There are a lot of times, and I'm sure people watching I'm Not Your Negro might say, well, this is just the facts, this is just the way it is. This is just somebody basically moving pieces of a puzzle around and somehow making them fit together. But the reality is like with a puzzle, the filmmaker has a narrative. Mm-hmm. There is a beginning, middle, and end. There is a peak that he's trying to reach. There is a point of entry and then a point of exit that he wants to leave you at. So there is a narrative in there. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times the average person will watch a documentary and think that they're seeing just the facts, just the way it is. When Michael Moore makes a documentary, it's just the facts. Mm-hmm. If, whomever, Ken Burns, whomever makes a documentary, it's just the facts. But the reality is it's still performative. There is still manipulation of the pieces so that you get a certain tone or inflection, or you get a certain emotional resonance or emotional peak when this happens, when that happens. And that's done with the music and with the score as well. To create a sense of tension, to create a sense of release, to create a sense of, whatever, letting go, what have you.
Yeah, I mean, again, you're dealing with like a, even though it's a quote unquote documentary, it's a narrative voice behind it, and that narrative voice sometimes it impinges upon reality. Yeah, and it makes things, it can make things like tilt towards one way or the other. You know what though? But I mean, just as much as they're doing it, not saying it's right and not saying tit for tat, but that's been done forever in America by the powers that be towards tilting the side of our side towards making things like it's great. Like, you know, my country tis of the sweet land of liberty of the I sing my ass. You know?
Yeah.
So I mean, you know, and don't get me wrong, I'm not an angry, you know, person about how my people of color and various colors and hues have been treated throughout the world. I get it. But at the same time, it's like, you know, I can't be like lulled into a sense of complacency and not realizing these things exist and not address them, you know? And it's just frustrating at times to see, you know, like, okay, yeah, that's not why this is the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You know, it that sounds good, but if it weren't for this, you wouldn't even be here. Or if we didn't do this, you wouldn't be there. You know, and it's a thing where, you know, I've been watching on YouTube a lot of things, watching the quote unquote myth of the poor Africa. You know, and it's like, well, yeah, it's poor because the same way you raped it back then is the same way you're fucking raping it right now. You know, even though there's a little bit more money involved, you know, there's still a thing where it's a continuous like underbidding of the monetary funds you should be giving them for what they're giving you. You know, so it's just an aggravating thing, man. Yeah. That's all.
No.
Sorry.
No.
Ranting.
It's fine. As a documentary attempts to, you know, to kind of reveal its subject, and sometimes the subject is, you know, drug use or the mafia or civil rights or women's rights or the arts or a particular figure within any of those different areas. Do you guys feel like you all have more of a sense? Because I get the impression that none of us were really big readers of Baldwin's writings, although we were all familiar. But do you guys feel like you all got a sense of who he was and what he was about watching the documentary, and especially seeing footage of him making speeches and addressing people in college campuses and in different large forums?
Yeah, I was gonna say the part about him at Oxford University, you know, that in particular, you're just riveted. Like the way he was just, it's like he gave voice to that, and I hate to say black rage, but it's there. It's in the undercurrent of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He gave eloquence to that black rage, you know, and I think sometimes that's how some people need to intake something. Like you can come up and punch somebody in the mouth and say, that's for that. You know, or you can kind of caress them and just take them by the shoulder. Hey, man, you know what I'm saying? Like, can I rap with you for a second? You know, and just kick it to them that way. Right. And then once you got them, you give them that full blast. Like, these are my grievances. This is why I feel this way. You know, but you're not doing it with like a punch in the face. It's almost like you're cutting them, and I forgot who said it, you're cutting them with a feather. You're cutting them across the face with a feather, you know, instead of a punch to the face. And that's what Baldwin was, you know, it felt to me. That's what he was doing. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I got from it. Yeah. Right. It's a yeah, man. It's like you're stating, it's a death by 1,000 cuts versus a quick gut knife to the jugular. And I appreciate that, man. Like to me, it's like he was never trying to disembowel them with his knowledge. He was always trying to inform them. And when he went to these situations, I mean, look at the size of this guy. He may have been like 5'0", he was frail, but his mind was large and expansive. So when he went to these places, he was going there to amongst their schools and the Oxfords and things of that nature to help them understand better why we react the way we react, why the situation is the way it is, and how we can come to until they come to a meeting of the minds as to what they put upon us. We and
can't
to your point, D, the telling part is at that debate at Oxford, when Baldwin was done making his point, standing ovation. You know, however many people were in the audience, standing ovation.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until he got back to America and you go on to the Dick Cavett show and other things like that. It's only in America where they're like, well, hold on now. Let me give you some pushback to what you're saying. You guys have never had it so good. What are you talking about? Come on. That type of thing. And it's like, motherfucker, do you hear what I've been saying? Do you see what's going on outside your window?
Right.
What the hell? And it's so funny how, and that's always been that way. It's even that way today. How you get a better view of American goings on from like a foreign agency like the BBC or Al Jazeera than the actual news agencies here. You know, it just in terms of maybe it's the distance they have from, you know, they're able to be on the outside looking in and appreciate the situation that way. But here in America, it's like, man, you know, if somebody disagrees with you, oh man, they ready to just jump up and say, no, of course not. Even though it's obvious that mistreatment is going on, that this is going on, and so forth. But it just seems like America, in and of itself, is just ready to say, no, it's not that bad, and that's the problem. That's the problem. For the entirety of its existence, it's just been saying, oh, well, it ain't that bad. Even though they've gone to war over it, a civil war, they've intervened in other people's, you know, affairs because of it.
Right.
You know, but back here, you got your own internal domestic problems that you continue to ignore because you're under this cloud, this fog of, well, it's okay. It's all right. No, it's not all right. And that's what Baldwin was trying to show you. You know, Baldwin amongst others. You know what I'm saying? Just, it's just so frustrating when you look back at it and you see it in the documentary too. You know, and you're wondering, why can't America at that time, you know, get it? You know, do you know, and I'll say this, do you know that by 1968, Martin Luther King was considered unpopular? Believe it or not, he was considered unpopular.
Yeah. Yeah.
When King was assassinated, his approval rating nationally was like in the 40s.
Right. Yes.
So, you know, when you talk to people who are opposed to like the protests nowadays, Black Lives Matters, and the people who talk against the activism and the methods that people use today and this, that, and the other, and because I had a conversation with this, with a coworker, you know, and I was like, okay, so what kind of protest do you think is good? What kind of protest do you think is the way to go? And he said, well, you know, the way MLK did it. I'm like, yeah, but a white man shot him and killed him.
Right.
Yeah.
Silence.
White people shot and killed him. So, and his approval rating was in the 40s. He was not greatly loved back then. You know, it's just now we look back through the rearview mirror and we see, you know, the eloquence in his words, and we see, you know, the goodness and the purity of his efforts, and we say, oh, of course. But see, that's why, like what Adrian said, you have to see that today. You have to be able to start looking around today and realize that there are injustices being perpetrated today and that they need to be addressed. It's the same thing with Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali, I remember distinctly my grandmother and my mother, people in the black community, people in the white community, people hated Muhammad Ali because he had a big goddamn mouth. And people would pay money and say, I'm going to go see Big Mouth get knocked out.
But,
and what they would go see is Big Mouth knock some motherfuckers out.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
You know, you go see him put some people on their ass. When he refused to be drafted, when he was telling them, why you want me to go over here and fight against the Viet Cong? They never did nothing to me. You my oppressor right here in my face and won't acknowledge me and acknowledge what you're doing to me right here now. People hated him for that. When he gave up his crown,
yeah,
you know, when he was made to give up his crown because he wouldn't go be drafted, people hated him for that.
Right.
Now, you know, 30-something years later, when he comes bringing in the torch in the Olympics and everybody stands to their feet and everybody, it's only through the rearview mirror that they look back and they realize, oh, that was a shitty attitude. You got to start seeing the shitty attitudes today. as it relates to minorities and all kinds of marginalized groups, LGBTQ, people with disabilities, societies. I don't know who said this, but societies are always going to be judged by how they treated the least in their society. If you're willing to discount them, if you're willing to disparage them, if you're willing to overlook their needs and their desires and and their want for freedom and for liberty and the pursuit of happiness, that's what you're going to be judged by. So, I think I definitely did get more of a sense of Baldwin because, like I said, my only connection to him in terms of his work was really Notes from a Native Son.
Okay.
And that's it. So I did like hearing about him being in France, oddly enough. I mean, I thought that was cool. I thought it was cool when Nina Simone left and was like, fuck it, I'm going to France.
Goddamn Mississippi. Mississippi, goddamn.
Yeah, goddamn. Mississippi, goddamn. Yeah. And there's also a great documentary about her that came out a few years ago as well that I really dug. The one flaw I will say that I thought in terms of us getting to know Baldwin in the movie is the film kind of skips over, kind of dances around Baldwin's sexuality, even though James Baldwin was really one of the first American writers to really kind of write openly about queer sexuality and that sort of thing. But I think for a good bit of his life, he probably was closeted because, if there's homophobia anywhere, there's homophobia in the black community.
Oh, yeah.
There's a ton of it, largely driven by the church and also largely driven by, black machismo. If you're a man and you like other men, you ain't no real man. That kind of attitude. So he lives in a society here in America where, his racial group is oppressed, and then within his own community, he's seen as an outlier and as a separate and as an other. And so that's like a whole other kind of oppression, to deal with as well.
Right. Yeah.
And to your point, man, the government was even going to use that against him. Like they flagged him as a public enemy, and like, okay, yeah, he's also known to go around gay places and frequent gay bars, or the case may be. It's like, well, okay, so what are you saying by saying that? So does that now like further bring him down the food chain? We could try and chop him down some more.
And the entire irony of that, as we all know, is J. Edgar Hoover. He that's crazy, isn't it? Oftentimes, you yell the loudest about the very thing that you are. The very thing that you are, you will rank on. Just, I don't like that.
I have a secret, so I'm going to call somebody out for their secret.
Exactly. You sit back and fold your arms like, it glad it wasn't me though. But it is you. But the other thing I was going to add to that as well, Swizz, is that you were talking about back then there were gay activists in the black community, like even within the civil rights struggle close to Dr. King, Bayard Rustin, he was gay, and, amongst others, of course, so it's there, and it's almost as if, I hate to put it like this, they almost had to pick one. It was just in terms of, okay, we're going to fight for these civil rights right now, or we're going to fight for these, gay rights. Right. Which one right now is more important per se? Which one takes more paramount? And it was the black struggle for black civil rights, and it wasn't until later in the decade, going into the early 70s, where you had gay rights starting to come to the forefront. You know what I'm saying? I hate to put it like everything in its time, because, any type of injustice is always of its time to be corrected. You know what I mean? But sometimes the mores of society are not prepared to deal with more than one thing at a time.
Oh, that's for sure.
You know what I'm saying? If we're talking about just, civil rights right now, then we can't be talking about trying to get rights for this. We can't be talking about women's lib, like even that had to come in its time.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? When the nation was like, whew, okay, I think we got the civil rights thing kind of under control. Oh man, now the women want stuff too? Oh, okay. You know, that type of thing. Oh man, you know, gay and lesbians want something now? Oh man. That's what I feel like society has done. You know, America has done. It's like, oh shit, what now? What? Like it's some type of tired ass daddy. Just what?
What? Uncle Sal.
Exactly. What?
Right. Right. You know, I will say this, man. Two things. I'll say this for two things. One thing is, I think that we got the Statue of Liberty prematurely, too soon, from France as a gift. The liberties that we are striving for and trying to we shall overcome and to learn to cope and deal with the inequities of all kinds, all sides, from different ends of the spectrum, still have not been accomplished yet. Now I realize sometimes you give people a chance based on what their aspirations are to become that, but at the same time it's like, okay, 100 years, 200 years, it's a long time for you to be experimenting and not fully engaging in the process of what it takes to get better at something. Now I'm grateful for the fact that at least we have this ability to give exposition and to have conversations like this and not be stricken from the record or be able to have to give expansion to other people throughout the world, throughout the country. But at the same time, it's like, okay, how long must we endure and take these things before it gets to a point where they can see this shit's not working for everybody? And I realize everybody's not going to win, but we're not talking about winning here. We're talking about bare equities, let's have a fucking living wage. You want to expound upon the fantastic and science fiction side of things, wherein you live in this fucking utopia where people of different colors and things can get along and go into outer space and shit. When you can't even work next to your coworker and realize that of a different ethnicity or different racial makeup without having some kind of crazy derogatory statement to be made about them. So it's like, for me, focus on learning how much more you're like about that person, how you are different from that person, and that's how you begin to start to solve those differences. We all fucking bleed, we all fucking die, and we all love. So there you go. Let's build those rapports based on those three simple things and see where we can go from there.
Yeah, but you got power and capitalism and the accumulation of wealth driving everything. When I used to see the word white supremacy, the phrase white supremacy, I would oftentimes associate it with just out and out racism or Nazis or something overt like that. All it means is that we remain on top. We remain in charge.
Yeah.
We don't hate you, but we want to stay in charge. So when people talk about Donald Trump or any of these people being white supremacists, it has less to do with racism and all of that. It's more, I have to be the one in charge. I have to be the one in control. When you hear phrases like our way of life changing and you won't have a country, what that means is our way of life with us in charge, you won't have a country where you're in charge. That's what they're upset about.
Yeah, man.
That's what they're upset about. And to answer your question, when you said how long, not long.
Right. Hey, man. Look, it's as simple as this, Wiz. This is my final on it. As simple as chess. White always moves first.
Do it. Like that's a hard, fast rule. Like white always moves first.
Yeah.
But you must always bet on black.
Bet on black. That's it.
John Cutter, 1992.
John Cutter. Hey, look, my buddy D. his favorite phrase from that movie, and I'd always told him I was gonna get one of you guys to do like a graphic design image of Wesley Snipes from the movie.
Yeah.
And then put the phrase next to it where the bad guy says, "He's a black man, very smooth and convincing."
Oh man.
But well, as it relates to the movie, I will say this: I really enjoy it. I really recommend it. I know you guys do too.
Yeah.
For anyone to check it out, I Am Not Your Negro. It is on Hulu and Netflix, and it's on Amazon too. But I think you have to pay for it if you watch it on Amazon.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's a great documentary. Not perfect, but I mean, really great. And I think Baldwin, you do get a sense of what Baldwin was about, and what his commitment was to his art, and also to the struggle, for civil rights for Black Americans during the civil rights era. And I'll say this: he, as an artist, he is a perfect example of what Nina Simone said when she said, "An artist's duty is to reflect the times."
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And he's a great example of that. He was drawn from France back to America because he wanted to reflect the times. He wanted to be a part of what was going on. He didn't want to just write, out in the clouds. He wanted to write with boots on the ground. I think he did that. So.
Yeah, and I'll say one more thing too, just in terms of him being a black expatriate for that time. It's so interesting, but also very telling that you had a lot of black artists, who were expatriates themselves, jazz musicians like, Miles Davis, other, creatives, like, especially writers and jazz musicians and musicians overall, they found, and I hate to put it like this, they almost found like a refuge from like just the virulent racism that was going on here, and they were respected over there. In Europe, and even, get this, even though the Russians at that time were supposed to be our enemy, they would go to Russia and have command performances, even as far back as like Paul Robeson. You know what I'm saying? Oh, going over to Russia and just respect it. And I'm talking about, this is back in the 30s. Like the late 30s, Paul Robeson is going over there and in Europe and England and everything, and they're treated like, wow, this is amazing. And then you see the coin flip when it come back to America. It's like, spit upon. How could you go to Russia? How could you do this? Are you a communist now since you went over there? Do you have these tendencies now? It's just so fucked up. And I think, to me, that's why, black people, just historically have always tried to find their place in this country. And the country tries to put them in a place. But the beauty of it is that we are undefinable. Even though a lot of times, there are many times where we try to define ourselves, within the context of what the country is telling us. But the fact that we're undefinable, that, man, it's a struggle to put us in a box, man. And I think that's the duty of, just people, not only black people, but of minorities and really anyone. Don't let anyone struggle to put you into a box. You fight against that. You don't let them close the lid on you. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So that's the struggle right there. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. You talking about Miles Davis, man. There's a story I remember him telling. I read it. And this was before he dated Cicely Tyson.
Yeah.
He dated, I think it was a French woman named Juliette Greco.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he talks about walking around holding hands with her in the public in France, and nobody giving a shit. And he was like, it blew his mind, that he could be in an interracial relationship, and not have, like you're saying, being spat upon and violence towards him and his girlfriend at the time. And it really was something else, but. And that's one of the reasons why, Nina Simone ultimately moved to France, is because she just felt like she was more respected as an artist. Jazz, by the time she left, jazz, was much less revered, than it was in its heyday. And she is and was, or she was rather, a true musician and truly committed to her art. And so like you said, I think a lot of them go over there and find it to be a very different world, and maybe it's even hard to come back. But I mean, this as much as America, that video of Doc Rivers, remember that video from a few months ago? Doc Rivers was being interviewed, and he was talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. He was just talking about, we love this country, and y'all just won't love us back. Y'all you just won't do it. He says, it's just, and you could just hear the pain in his voice and see the pain in his face, as he was discussing it. But anyway, go check out I Am Not Your Negro.
Yeah.
It's really good.
What stands out to me is just watching the Republican convention and they're spewing this fear, right? Like, all you hear is Donald Trump and all of them talking about fear. We're the ones getting killed. We're the ones getting shot. We're the ones that we're denied to live in certain communities. We've been hung. We've been shot, and all you do is keep hearing about fear. It's amazing to me why we keep loving this country, and this country does not love us back. And it's really so sad.